welcome back to another lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be doing some moon or lunar photography. And although in the last lesson, which was astrophotography, you might have learned that we needed slower shutter speeds and to use a tripod and to have the widest open aperture possible. With moon photography, it's quite a bit different. We actually don't need a tripod. It can be shot handheld, which is good. We're usually dealing with faster shutter speeds and aperture. Usually I shoot between f8 and f11 when it comes to the moon, because although we could shoot it wide open at, let's say, for instance, f2.8, it's so far away, it's definitely going to be in focus. But as I did mention in one of the lens lessons quite a while ago, the sharpest point for most lenses is between f8 and f11. So when I do moon photos, I usually shoot between somewhere there, f8 and f11. And when it comes to the ISO, I just try and keep that as low as possible, and shutter speed pretty fast. So this is what I'm saying, you can shoot handheld. The moon is very, very bright. It's really deceiving because if you've done astrophotography before, as I said, you know that you need longer shutter speeds and things like that, but it's because those stars and things like that are so far away, we need all that time for them to be exposed into the camera, whereas the moon, it's extremely bright. So yeah, fast shutter speeds, low ISOs, and a bit closed down on the aperture is all you need. The other thing, as I said as well, you don't need a tripod, which is great. So you can shoot them handheld, as long as you choose a fast enough shutter speed, which we're going to get to. It's obviously daytime at the moment. I've already checked the Photo Pills app, which is the app I use to check the moon phase and where the stars are and all that type of thing. And it's telling me that it's pretty much a full moon tonight, which is perfect. The only thing we need to hope for is that there's no cloud, or the cloud clears up. It can be a little bit cloudy as long as it's relatively clear around the moon, which we're hoping for. Now, the only other thing you really need for moon photography is a long lens. So the longest one I have is 300 millimeters. It's not crazily long. And I'm going to show you a trick to make the moon image as big as possible. So what's going to happen basically tonight, which you'll see when I take the photo, the moon's going to be quite small in the whole frame. So let's say the frame's this big. The moon's only going to take up a small portion of that because I can't zoom far enough in for it to fill the frame. Even a 600 millimeter lens is not going to fill the frame. So I'm going to show you a technique when it gets to the editing side of things to make the moon much larger in the frame, but still be good quality. Because you know when you crop photos, they lose quality. It is thanks to some new features in Lightroom and Photoshop, but we'll just be using Lightroom for this one, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. Now, if you only have a 50mm lens or a 100mm lens, it's still going to work, but it's just going to be a little bit harder when it comes to making the moon fill the frame. Now, if you're shooting on a crop sensor camera, so the camera I'll be using is a full frame sensor, but if you're shooting on a crop sensor, you have a little bit of an advantage in a way, because if you have, say I had a 200mm lens on my camera, it's going to be 200mm. But on a crop sensor, let's say an APS-C sensor from a Canon, that 200mm is going to be end up looking more like a 350mm. So it's kind of helpful for moon photos when it comes to having a smaller sensor. But nonetheless, we're going to wait till nighttime. Hopefully there's no clouds and we can get a good shot. And I'm going to walk you through that, and then I'm going to walk you through the editing side as well. So let's wait till nighttime. Alright, so welcome to part 2 of this. I actually had to shoot this on a different night. The night I recorded the intro, it was way too cloudy. In terms of the app that I used, I realized I didn't mention that. I used Photo Pills, and that app can actually tell you what moon phase is currently happening, and you can also check when the next full moon is and things like that. So you don't have to shoot it on a full moon, but it just it looks better. You can see more of it. So yeah, let's get started. I've got my 70 to 300mm lens on, so I'm going to be shooting all the way at 300mm. The longer lens you have, the more advantage you have here, because you'll see how small the moon is actually going to end up in the frame when I take these photos. All right, I'm just going to be shooting these handheld because we're going to end up with a pretty fast shutter speed. The only reason that you should use a tripod, or you can use a tripod, it's not a big deal, but the moon does move through the sky quite quickly, just like the stars do. So you'll notice even if you take a photo over 10 seconds or something, I mean, not a 10-second shutter speed, but if you take a photo and then take another one 10 seconds later on a tripod, the moon will have moved through the frame. So we need to keep that in mind. One reason to use a tripod though is to set your focus. Some cameras will struggle focusing on the moon, and it also depends on the focal length. If you have a short lens and the moon is really, really small in your frame, it is going to be hard to focus on, especially automatically. So you may have to do manual focus. If you have manual focus assist, meaning that it zooms in while you manual focus, then use that. And just try and make, just like the astrophotography lesson, try and make the moon as smallest point as possible so there's no like blurred edges or anything like that. Now in terms of settings, as I said in the intro, you can shoot this at f2.8 if you wanted to, or whatever the lowest your lens goes, but most lenses are sharpest between f8 and f11. And yeah, even though the moon's far away, it would be in focus even at f2, f2.8, whatever. I do close my lens down to f8 or f11, somewhere around there, usually f8, because I find that with this lens and most other lenses, f8 is usually the sharpest point. So let's frame this up here. I'm going to zoom all the way out to 300 for this lens, and I'm just going to set my aperture to f8 and see what we're working with. Now, it is a better idea to underexpose rather than overexpose. The moon has a lot of really bright spots on it, so if you overexpose those, it's really hard to get those back. So I suggest, if anything, you underexpose slightly, and then you can always bring those back up in Lightroom and Photoshop. Oh, just remembered, I am going to show you two different methods of doing this. The first method is if you're using a relatively late version of Lightroom. Some of the features and technology that it has, where no matter how small the moon is in the image, we're going to be able to make it bigger and still maintain decent quality. The second method that I'm going to be doing is what I do in the past, which involves stacking images of the moon. And the reason we stack the images is because once we get them into Photoshop and we stack them a certain way, you can get rid of a lot of the noise from zooming in or cropping in on our photo. But I'll get to that. So you are going to hear my camera take multiple photos because it's in burst mode. I'll probably take 10 or 15 photos, but if you are doing the first method, you only need one photo. But I suggest take as many as you like, so you can pick your favorite, and just in case you miss focus or something. But in the second method, I'll be showing you the stacking method in Photoshop. So this video will have both of those in it. You can just choose which one you like to do. I use the first method now because it's a lot quicker, a lot easier. But for those who aren't using a later version of Lightroom, then the second method is for you. So let's get shooting. So f8. That's looking pretty good. I'm just going to go a bit faster on my shutter speed. Like I said, better to underexpose. So I'm actually at 1/800th of a second. That's how bright the moon is. It's very deceiving. When you shoot astro, it's obviously a lot different. So I'm at 1/800th of a second, f8, and ISO 320. So let's see what we can get here. I'll take this photo, I'll show what that looks like. And you can see that's how small the moon is in the frame, even with a 300mm lens. So if you do have a 600mm lens or more, then you definitely got an advantage. All right, I'm just gonna zoom into that last shot that I took. And we're a bit blurry, so I'm gonna manual focus this because the autofocus seems to be struggling to get that in focus. This is where it's a good time to use a tripod if you want to, because you can just have it sitting there while you adjust the focus and watch it. But I'm gonna do this freehand and focus at the same time. So slip my camera into manual and just set my focus. You should be somewhere near infinity, but it's not always the case because at infinity, the moon's blurry in my shot. Okay, that's looking good. Zoom in, check I'm happy, not too bad. All right, beautiful. So I've manual focused because the autofocus when I took the photo, even though it said it was in focus, I noticed the moon was a bit blurry. So always play back and zoom into your images and make sure they are in focus. So this is the part where it might be easier on a tripod because you can just turn your focus wheel while you're watching the screen. It's a bit hard to hold the camera and adjust the focus because it's all over the place. All right, I'm ready to take my photo. So as I said, you are going to hear a burst mode. And I'm just doing that so I can show you both methods of editing these photos. Alright, zoom in, make sure I'm happy. Alright, that looks pretty good. So my final settings are 1/800th of a second at f8, ISO 320, sorry. That's it. Let's jump back into the computer and I'll show you exactly how I'll process these with those two methods. Alright, so here we are back at the computer and I have 11 images. As I said, I took the burst mode. So yeah, we have 11 images. I'm going to show you the first method first, which is just using a Lightroom, and we'll just pick our favorite here. This one here looks decent. As you can see, that's how small the moon is in the frame. So as we zoom in, that's the kind of quality we're getting, just because we're zooming in or cropping in really far. So this is the advantage, this is where you'd have an advantage with a much longer lens, or even if you had a 300mm lens on an APS-C or micro four thirds sensor, you'd get that longer reach. Alright, as I said before, final settings were ISO 320 at 300mm, f8, 1/800th of a second. The reason I shot at ISO 320 and not ISO 100 is just so I could get that slightly faster shutter speed, because I was shooting at handheld. So that's the reason for that. And yeah, f8, I find is the sharpest point of most lenses. So what we're going to do with this image is not really do any edits as of yet. We're just going to make sure the white balance and things like that looks okay, and then we're just going to scroll down. As I said, this is for people who have a later version of Lightroom, or if you have the Adobe Creative Cloud. This is Lightroom Classic version 13, but it's been in Lightroom for a while now. So what we're going to do is under the detail panel here, you'll see the denoise button. Just click that. Wait for that to load. And then just untick denoise and click super resolution. Now what this is going to do is make the image much, much larger, which I'll show you in a second. So we're going to press enhance and wait for that. All right, and now we have an enhanced version, as you can see by the file name here, enhanced. And this is the original next to it, and this is the enhanced version. So, sorry, this one to the right of it is the original, and that's the enhanced version. Even though they're not going to look much different from here, what you'll see if we hover over the file, one of them is 14,016 pixels by 9,344. So it's much bigger than what we started with, because we started with 7,008 by 4,672. So basically, looks like it's pretty much doubled, which I guess that's what it does. So now with this enhanced version, what we can do is come up to our crop tool here and just crop in as much as you like. So you can see the preview up here of what it's going to look like. So I'm just going to kind of get it somewhat in the middle. Something like that. Press enter. And it's not perfect. It's still obviously, it's very pixelated, but this is just the limitation of shooting with not a lens that's very, very long. But from here, what I can do is start doing a few little edits. Maybe you want to warm the moon up a little bit. I like that color like there. Maybe play with the contrast a bit. I like to kind of lower the shadows a bit, just add that little bit of contrast, the difference between the bright parts and the dark parts. And I'll also just play around with the whites and blacks and things like that, just how I would with any other image. Now another thing I like to do is dehaze sometimes helps, especially if it's a little bit cloudy or misty. The dehaze can help to get rid of some of that and increase the clarity, although increasing the clarity can also increase the pixels that you see, so just be careful of that. And the texture is the same. As you see, if the texture goes all the way up, it's very, very grainy, so we'll keep that low. Another way you can remove some of the pixels or some of the pixelation is if you come down to the detail tab here. Now, unfortunately, once you've used the super resolution, you can't then denoise it. Well, not at this current moment in time, because it has to be done with a raw file. And once you do the super resolution, it's no longer a raw file. But we can do some manual noise reduction, and we want to work with the luminance here because it's luminance noise. It's noise due to brightness, not color. So we'll just lift this. If you go all the way, you'll see it gets a little too smooth and a bit ugly. So let's put the detail up pretty high because we want to retain a lot of that. And the contrast we'll put up a little bit as well. And I'll lower this because it's too much. Just until maybe somewhere there where it looks somewhat realistic. So we'll just do it before and after. So that's all we've done. We cropped in, we change the white balance a bit, and yeah, that's it. That's probably as far as I'd take this. As I said, it's not perfect, but we did shoot it on a 300mm lens and we've cropped in a lot. So that's the first method. The second method we're going to discuss, I'll just undo all of this and I'll show you the second method, which is the older method, which you probably can get better results with, to be honest. But it does involve Photoshop and some image stacking, but I'll show you how to do that. I'm just going to reset all of this and we'll start that in a second. Alright, so now we're going to do this second method, which is called stacking. And stacking involves taking multiple photos. So as you can see here, I've got 11 photos of the moon. And you can see they're in different places because of my hand movement. But not only that, if you do this, you'll notice the moon moving just simply because, just like the stars do, Earth's moving. So the stars and moon move relative to us as well. So what I want to do is just working on one image. I just want to do a couple of things, just maybe some small things, mainly just white balance. And then just another thing I'll do is crop this. Now I don't want to crop too small. The reason we're cropping these before we stack them is because of file size reasons. And it doesn't make a difference in quality whether you stack first and then crop or crop and then stack. But I like to crop and then stack just because of just simply because of file sizes. So let's crop to there. What we've got to be careful of is that in another image, the moon isn't somewhere getting cut off from the crop, but we'll find out in a second. So just press enter on that. And what I'm going to do is just, with the first image selected, I'm just going to hold down shift and then press the last image and then press sync. and check all and synchronize. Beautiful. So you can see in all the images the moon hasn't been chopped off anywhere. It's almost leaving the frame here, but it's still quite a bit. So there we go. So we've zoomed in. This is that's all ready to go, and we haven't done any of the denoise or any of the stuff in Lightroom because I'm going to show you a different method. So select all these images once again. So the first one all the way to the last one, holding shift and then click. Then we're going to right click and edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. Alright, so now all of our layers are loading into Photoshop. We'll wait for those to finish. There is actually software specifically designed for stacking moon photos, but I can't remember the names of any off the top of my head. I've used them once in the past, but I don't do it all that often, so Photoshop for me is more than enough. But alright, so all our images are loaded. So with the first layer selected here, we're going to go to the bottom one and holding shift, we're going to click, so all of our layers are selected. Then we're going to come up to edit, auto align layers. Now instead of auto, I prefer to do reposition on this one. There's been times where I've taken photos of the moon just like this and I've used auto, and for some reason it's tried to, I don't know if it's because the moon's moving through the shot or something, it's tried to bend some of the photos to match the ratio of the moon. So I just like to do reposition, and what that means is it's only going to move the images in 2D space. It's only going to move the images in 2D space to stack them on top of each other, aligned. And there we go. So if we turn these off, you'll see that the moon is perfectly aligned in every shot. So we'll turn these back on. So what we're going to do now is select our first image or first layer, and then holding shift and click the last layer. We're now going to right click and convert to smart object. Alright, and now that we have our smart object, what we can do is go up to layer, smart objects, stack mode, and we're going to set that to median. And that's all done. So what you're going to see now if we zoom in is that although it's a little bit blurry, there's less noise and it's going to end up much sharper. So I'll show you what I usually do next. What I'll usually do, just with that first layer there selected, which is the smart object, just press Control or Command J. That's going to duplicate the layer. Then we're going to come up to Filter, Other, High Pass, and we're going to set the pixels here to somewhere where wherever you want to be sharpened will be sharpened. So don't want to go too crazy, maybe somewhere around 4.4 from this image. Everyone's going to be different, so just experiment with this. Press OK. And then we're going to set the blend mode up here for this layer to overlay. And as you can see, we've brought a lot of that sharpness back. If we turn this layer off and on, we've brought a lot of that sharpness back. Let's do that again, but this time we're going to go a little bit more on that high pass filter. Maybe we'll try 6.8. That's probably better. Don't want to go overboard with that. That's probably better. At this point now what we can do is right click and flatten image, and then you can press Control S or Command S, or just come up to File and Save, and that'll save back in Lightroom where you can do some further edits. So we'll do that now. Just press Control S, it's going to save, it'll come back to Lightroom. So here we are back in Lightroom. Now what we can do is crop this even further because it's gotten a little bit bigger because of the way we did our stacking. So crop this to whatever size you like. Make it really fill the frame on this one. Try and get it somewhere in the middle. There we go. So it's never going to be perfect quality just because it's a 300mm lens. We've cropped in massively, and the more you stack, the more images you stack, the cleaner of an image you get. But from here now what we can do is just play around with the dehaze, clarity, all those things we did a bit earlier on the first image until we're happy with it. So that's basically about it. What I sometimes like to do with these images as well, in Photoshop, I often like to select the moon or just draw a circle. I'll show you how to do that now actually really quickly. So I'll just create a new layer, so you can press new layer down here, and I'll grab the elliptical marquee tool, and holding shift I'm just going to draw a circle somewhat the size of the moon, and then drag it right into the middle of the moon as much as possible. Move this out of the way, somewhere there. What I'm going to do is press Control or Command Shift I. That's going to invert the selection. We're just going to unlock this layer and make sure this layer is selected, and I'm just going to press delete. So it's going to delete everything that's that's not within our selection. So now what I can do is add a new layer. So now that we have that moon on a layer of its own, just like this, we can delete this empty layer and maybe drag this one underneath and press Shift Backspace and just fill the contents with black. And that just gives a really smooth, like sharp edge, I should say. It just looks a little bit better than the fringing we kind of had around here. That's just typically because of the atmosphere around the moon and things like that, but also just because the camera, it's just not zoomed in enough to get the detail. So that, in my opinion, ends up looking a little bit cleaner. That's sometimes what I do. So let's actually just save this. So let's just flatten this image and then save that back to Lightroom. There it is there. So now we can do the crop and all those things I did earlier again. But yeah, as I said, it's not going to be 100% perfect. The longer lens you have, the better you're going to get, better results you're going to get. And another beautiful thing is you can actually get a T-mount adapter for most cameras, meaning that you can attach a telescope to your camera. And telescopes optically aren't usually the best in terms of image quality, which is why this stacking is really helpful if you did that, if you did go down the road of using a telescope. It just cleans up a lot of the image and removes a lot of the noise. So from here, like I said, you can do little edits, whatever you wanted to do, warm it, cool it, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's basically it. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.